Hello everyone and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. When I started this channel back in April this year, I thought it would be a good idea to introduce myself to the viewers, to give everyone a bit of an idea of where I come from as a reader. So I did 3 bookshelf tours. Those videos were a few of the very first I made, and they're not very good videos. They're very shaky and I did not quite know what to talk about at the moment. So I would like to do a revisited video of those bookshelf tours. First off, the literature. This time I made pictures of the bookshelves, which makes watching it a lot more easy or quieter. This is the first bookshelf I have. One of my interests is, as you can probably see, alchemy. There's this big Taschen book there, Alchemy and Mystic. That's one of my interests. Furthermore, it's a lot of Paul Auster, as you can see on the right. Paul Auster is one of my favorite authors all time. The only thing that his latest novel, I think it is his latest, I'm not quite sure if he's published anything new, is 4321. That's the big chunker there. That was quite a disappointment for me. I didn't finish it, so it's one of my very few DNFs regarding Paul Auster. And as you can see on the second bookshelf, there's more Paul Auster there on the left. There is about 5 books by Michael Bagand, and some of those are co-authored. There's the Dead Sea Scrolls, that's the only Dutch one, and then the Jesus Papers, the Temple in the Lodge, the Messianic Legacy, and Holy Blood, Holy Grail. Especially the last one has gained some popularity. Because it's actually one of the main inspirations for the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. Let's go to the next shelf. This is a very interesting volume here, The Magic Flute, which is a study, an extensive study of the Mozart opera, The Magic Flute. And the author, Joy van den Berg, is investigating the alchemical elements that are displayed in this opera. If you like the music and you like alchemy, then this is the perfect mix. Okay, on to the 4th shelf. This is about 90% Dutch, if I see that correctly. Here on the right side, there's a small selection of books about the Blaskit Island. This is one of the most western islands of Ireland. It has been inhabited until 1958, if I'm not mistaken. That was the year when the last few inhabitants of the island were taken to the mainland because there were no schools, there was no medical care or anything. So life there became almost impossible, according to our modern standards, that is. What intrigues me about this island is that there was this specific culture, the Gaelic culture, the Irish Gaelic culture, and it's just stopped existing. So all the tales, all the customs or whatever you have within a culture simply vanished, and that somehow intrigues me. The next shelf. This shelf doesn't contain very much I could talk about to an English audience. That starts on the right with one of my very favorite authors in the Dutch language, which is Jeroen Brouwers. This is just a small portion of my entire Brouwers collection. As you can see, the next shelf is entirely Jeroen Brouwers. These are mainly his essayistic works, which is extensive, and I could go into detail for hours about what he has written, but, well, it's all in Dutch. I think there's only one book of his translated into English, which is on the next shelf. You can see it popping out there in bright red. That's Sunken Red. That's the only book that has been, I think the only book there that has been translated into English by this author. And I have 2 copies of it, as you can see. The right one is bezonken rood in Dutch. The right one is bleached completely by the sun, so it's hardly readable. That's a first printing. And left to that one is the brighter red, which is the 50th printing, which is quite a lot in our Dutch language area. And I have both because, well, as I said, this is my most important Dutch author. So that's Jeroen Brouwer. On to the next one. Nothing much to say about this shelf, really. The only thing that stands out a little bit is the Callanish. Callanish is a stone circle in Scotland. It's on the island of Lewis Harris. And, well, there's no other way to put it, but I'm in love with that stone circle. So this is a small portion of all the books I have on Callanish. There are much bigger books that are on another shelf, but this is a small portion of it. On this shelf, there is my Edgar Cayce collection. For the people who don't know who Edgar Cayce is, he was some sort of seer or prophet or whatever you want to call it, who was able to make very, very accurate diagnoses of people. And he did that when he was in some sort of trance and without the people themselves being present in the room. So what he did, he focused on the person who needed a reading, wherever that person was, and he could instantly say what the ailment was of this person. With a few exceptions, he was always 100% accurate. And he also gave cures. Now, the funny thing is, Edgar Cayce didn't have any education in healthcare. He wasn't a doctor or anything. Edgar Cayce was born in 1877 and died in 1945. Since I've heard of him, he's intrigued me, and I've still got a few books left to read about him, which I will do. What's interesting here? Göbekli Tepe. This is one of the studies that I like to read. This is about some ancient dig in Turkey. They found some remains of what they think was a temple. They believe Göbekli Tepe to be about 11,500 years old, which is one of the oldest settlements made by men. Then on the right here we have a Dutch author which I used to read in my earlier days, Louis Couperus. I'll just mention him so you know he existed. The next shelf. There's there's 4 books by Charles Dickens, one even in Dutch. Somehow Charles Dickens never really stuck with me. I don't know why exactly. On to the next one. I do want to mention Pierre H. Dubois. You can see his books starting a little bit on the left and going all the way to the right. I knew Pierre Dubois personally. He was a very, very nice person, an older gentleman whom I met when I was just starting out to be a writer. He was always very encouraging and interested in my process as a writer. And I very, very much enjoyed his books. On the next shelf, there is my Umberto Eco collection. Everything in Dutch. I've got 8 books by Eco. And the only one I did not like is in the middle, and that's The Mysterious Flame by Queen Loana. I just didn't understand that book. Apart from that one, every book here is incredible. Just incredible. I did an extensive review of the cemetery in Prague, or the cemetery of Prague. I don't know the English title. And I intend to do a separate video on that book. On to the next shelf. That's number 16. Erasmus, Desiderius Erasmus. He is one of the humanistic writers from the Netherlands. I absolutely enjoy his writing. He was a scholar, but he somehow had the ability to write very entertaining books. The most famous one is Lof der Zotheid. It's been translated into English and it's titled Praise of Folly. This is a very, very entertaining book. Shelf number 17 or 16, whatever. Gustave Flaubert is the one that stands out on this shelf. I read a lot of his books in translation, of course, because French is not my go-to language, I'm afraid. I particularly enjoyed his letters. He was an excellent novelist, but even more skilled in writing letters. One of these bundles is called Hate is a Virtue, and that quite accurately sums up the way he writes letters. The other thing interesting about this shelf is William Faulkner, whom I did not read as much of as I would like. The same thing goes for John Fowles on the far right here. All right, next shelf. That's nothing much of interest to the English viewer. The next one, I would like to point out Malcolm Gladwell on this shelf. On the far right here you see my small collection. These are, if I'm not mistaken, all the books he's published so far. With Blink, the smallest one on the far right, and The Tipping Point being the most famous too. He's an excellent writer. These are non-fiction books in which the writer explores human behavior. His observations are mind-blowing, really. And he's a very, very good writer. He knows how to tell a story. So, Malcolm Gladwell, check him out. I really, really like Graham Greene, but as with many other authors, I just read a few of his books, and he was also a very prolific writer. And then shelf number 20 or 21. Here you find a few other books that have my interest. They're by Graham Hancock, somewhere in the middle. You see The Fingerprints of the Gods, where he explores the pyramids and much more, not just the pyramids, but he has a very original view on what the pyramids meant or why they were built. Then on the right you have Maarten het Hart. He is one of the most popular Dutch writers here. Don't know if he's been translated. I think he must be, but I buy every new book he publishes. Most of them are just excellent. Then we have on the next shelf Robert Heinlein. These are the few non-fiction books that I have by him. And the two biggest books here are his biography, written by William Patterson. I like reading biographies. On the right of Heinlein, there's two very big chunkers, which contain the biography of one of the Dutch writers, Willem Frederik Hermans. I'm sorry there's a lot of Dutch in this, but well, that's the language I grew up in as a reader. On this shelf on the far right, there's a small collection by Susan Hill. Then on the next shelf, there's a very small William Horwood section here. 3 books that are on the left: The Boy with No Shoes, Callanish and Scalagrig. For those of you who have seen my video of the best books I read, Scalagrig is number 1. So this is the best book I ever read, still to this day. I no doubt will be doing a separate review on this book. The only thing worth mentioning for you is Eowyn Eve, or Ivy, I don't know how you pronounce her name. She is an Alaskan writer, and she's mostly famous for The Snow Child. To the Bright Edge of the World is her second novel. It's a very good novel, but it's not as good as her debut novel, The Snow Child, which was enthralling. That's the best word for it. The next shelf, there's James Joyce. I've got 3 books of him, and I'm afraid I haven't read any of them. He scares me somehow. On the left, we have a Nobel Prize winner. That used to be one of my main interests in reading literature. I always read the Nobel Prize winners. Imre Kertész, he passed away in 2016. He is one of the Holocaust survivors, and as you can imagine, that's his main theme. I enjoyed all of his works. They're high literature, so they're not page turners, but they are so well written and so profound. Especially, I don't know the English title for it, but it's Onbepaald door het lot. I'll put up a picture of the English version. This is the book that really won me over for Imre Kertész. This is so profound. I really literally cried at the end of this book because of the depth of what he was writing. On the right there is Krishnamurti, one of my interests. Next shelf, the picture is a bit blurry, I'm sorry for that. But well, it's only Dutch. The only thing I would like to point out is the name Jacques Kruithof. He used to be a very, very good friend of mine, passed away way too early, and these are his works. He never was a very popular writer in the Netherlands, but what he wrote was of very much interest to me. Next up is C.S. Lewis on the very left there. I read more of his works. I read Narnia. And then there is a stack of books there. The Soap Man, When I Heard This Bell, Non Dare Oppose. Those books are all about the island of Lewis Harris in the far northwest of Scotland, the Outer Hebrides. I'm very interested in those islands over there, and these books are about those islands. I would like to point out Kai Longfellow. She passed away not too long ago. These are her works, not all of them. There are a few I still would like to read. And the most important work for me is The Secret Magdalene. This was my second favorite book of all time. I just admire this book. Every page of it is a treat. It's wonderful. It's just wonderful. On this next shelf, there you find my books, the books I've written and published so far. There are only two by my own name. The first is called De Vergeten Muze, which would translate as The Forgotten Muse. It's a novel, and the second one I published last year is called The Bridge to Nowhere, also a novel, and I intend to translate that book into English. Next one, Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Spanish writer whom I really admire, and a few English books, right? Then on the next shelf, which shelf are we? 30, 31, is the Anastasia books. They're on the left, they're in Dutch. It's from a Russian author. They're sort of spiritual books. They are about this woman, Anastasia, that the author, Vladimir Megre, she's a woman who lives in the woods, in the far Siberian woods. She just lives without a house, in nature, during winter and everything. And there's much debate about whether she is a figment of his imagination or if she really exists. Furthermore, on this shelf, I would like to mention the book by Anita Morjani, Dying to Be Me. This is an amazing story about a near-death experience. It's profound, it's wise, there's so much wisdom in this book. I absolutely would like to recommend it to anyone. Next shelf. Kate Moss. I used to read a lot of historical mystery books. There were 3 books in this series. Labyrinth is the first one, and somehow I lost that copy of the book, but I really enjoyed reading that. All right, mostly Dutch here. Then this is my Murakami section. I'm a huge fan of Haruki Murakami. Kafka on the Beach, that's the bleached yellow one here. Kafka on the Beach is my favorite Murakami so far. I also very much like The Murder on Commendatore, the 2 blue books there on the right. Then on the bottom shelf here, there's this Dutch writer, Neschio. If you can see, there's this very small green book there. You can hardly read the spine. Let me just say something very brief about Neschio. I don't think anything of his has been translated into any other language. He's a Dutch writer who lived from 1882 until 1961. Small green book. That's about everything he wrote. That's about it. These few very short stories are amazing. Amazing. They're still read and still popular nowadays. It's very special to have written so little and still be read more than 100 years later on. The next shelf is Dutch. Let's just leave it at that. I could say a lot about these books, but I want this video not to be that long. The shelf after that is Dutch as well. This is shelf number 35. And then we have a few books on these shelves deserve some extra attention, and those are the ones on the left there. These are the books by Neil Peart. He is mainly known as the drummer of the rock band Rush, the Canadian rock band Rush, but he was also a very, very gifted writer. Ghost Rider, that's the book on the far left here, which is his best work in my opinion. This next shelf, a lot of Dutch, and it's very dark here, but there are a few books by Graham Phillips, history books about ancient history. I think we're on shelf 38 or something by now. On this shelf we find Chaim Potok. He's a Jewish author, as you might have guessed by his name. I read them all and they're amazing. Really love his writing. Then this is my Proust, Marcel Proust collection. This is the Dutch translation of his famous novel series À la recherche du temps perdu, which I believe has been translated as Remembrance of Things Past. I read them all. As the Belgian author Paul de Wispelare used to say, once you've read Proust, your life will be changed forever. And he was quite right about that. This one is also very blurry, sorry for that. I've got Philip Pullman here. These are his non-fantasy books. I especially love the trilogy His Dark Materials, and he is now working on another trilogy, The Book of Dust. Then on the right there, the red and the yellow, those are children's books written by Arthur Ransome. The Swallows and the Amazons. They're lovely, lovely books. Then on the next shelf we have Gerard Reven, a Dutch author who in the beginning of his writing career tried his hand at writing English and was not very successful at that. In Dutch he was very successful. The three on the left are his biography, and all the other books there on the right are letters. He was a prolific letter writer. These are his novels on the next shelf. Shelf number 43. Here we have Salman Rushdie. I quite recently read Joseph Anton, which I enjoyed very, very much. In this book, Salman Rushdie relates about everything that happened just before and after Ayatollah Khamenei announced the fatwa, the death sentence, because he was the writer of a book called The Satanic Verses. The next shelf has some of my Oliver Sacks collection. I still have a few more in my TBR, and I don't know when, but I definitely want to read them. Every book of his is wonderful, wonderful to read. And then on the right there is part of my José Saramago collection. He is one of the Nobel Prize winners. All his books, really with no exception, all his books are amazing. He has such a unique way of telling a story with a lot of irony. These are a few of his books, and here on the left are the rest of his books, which I of course read in Dutch. Moving on to shelf number 45 or 46, I lost count a long time ago already. There's nothing much of interest to say about this shelf, so let's move on to the next one. We find Shakespeare. Any self-respecting English reader should have Shakespeare in his book collection, right? I don't have very much, as you can see, but I did read a little bit more than what's on here, but, well, he's not an easy read, let's put it that way. And then on the right there you have Jan Siebelink, one of the very famous Dutch writers. Here you have my collection of Georges Simenon. He is mainly famous for his Maigret, his series about the Inspector Maigret. And those books there from 1 until 24, I believe it is. I read all of these, and to be honest, I would not be able to retell any of his stories. They were fun to read, but they are somewhat forgettable. On the next shelf, another blurry picture, I'm afraid, but this is my Isaac Bashevis Singer collection, another Jewish author who was a Nobel Prize winner, read his entire oeuvre, which deserves even more readers than it has received so far. We're at the S by Lemony Snicket by now, so we're nearing the end. This is a series of unfortunate events. It's YA or children's books. I don't know exactly which category they fall into, but really enjoyed reading these. They were fun. They were really fun. And easy reads. Moving on, it's a Dutch author, Jacob Slavenburg. He translated the Nag Hammadi writings into Dutch. And he wrote a couple of other books regarding Gnosticism. Intriguing books. Here is the next shelf. Here you can see a couple of books about ancient stone circles, which is one of my many interests. This next shelf, the only author I would point out from this next shelf is a Dutch author, Ton Tellegen. He writes what he calls novels. Those are those small books on the right there. Ton Tellegen's novels are all set in one forest. A lot of animals live in that forest, but of each animal there is only one. So there's one ant, there's one squirrel. Natural enemies like the heron and the frog live alongside each other peacefully. And in this strange forest of Toontelligen, animals who are extinct also make an appearance, like the mammoth. This forest is very surrealistic, but on the other hand, it's very realistic as well. On the surface, they look like children's stories, but in truth they are very philosophical. Alright, next shelf. Well, you can browse through it. There's nothing much of interest for me to say. This shelf. Of a few books here I could talk for hours, but let's not do that. On the shelf, starting a little bit on the left side, you have books by Simon Vestdijk. He used to be a very popular writer. I think he's mainly forgotten at this time. He passed away in 1971. He started publishing books at about the age of 40. He used to be a doctor and turned to be a writer. And he was very prolific. He wrote about 3 to 4 books a year. I didn't read all of them, just this collection over here. Simon Vestdijk was once one of the serious contenders for the Nobel Prize for Literature, which he didn't win. In fact, not one Dutch author ever won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Here's some other works by Simon Vestdijk and my small collection of books on birds. I'm a bird watcher. The Wagner operas, I'm a very, very huge fan of Wagner. Here are the books, The Conversations with God by Neale Donald Walsch. There are more, but these are the 4 main ones, if you will. And I highly, highly, highly recommend these books to anyone. Anyone who's interested in the mystery of life, read these books. These are so profound. The writer, Neale Donald Walsch, set out one day to write an angry letter to God about everything that went wrong in his life. And while writing that letter, he suddenly found that he received an answer. His hand kept on writing, and he strongly believes that that's God himself who's giving these answers. Whether the answers directly come from God or not is actually irrelevant. Everything that's written in these books is so profound, so full of wisdom. These books, well, I think they explain the mystery of life. It's a gift, and it's a gift that I would like to give to everyone. So we're nearing the end. On this shelf, I only would like to point out the books by Raina Wynn. As you may or may not have seen, I did a video of the best book I read in 2022. And here's the one, The Landlines, on the right there. Wonderful, wonderful books. This is all Dutch. Here is Paul de Wispelare. He's a Belgian author whom I admire very much. I have known him personally. He's passed away a long time ago already. Very good writer. This is Jan Wolkers, also a very famous Dutch writer. And then I believe we have the final shelf. And on the left you see some books by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. I had more of him, but they went missing somehow. Probably loaned them to someone and never got them back, which happens quite a lot. But I love him. Unfortunately, he passed away way too early, but he was an excellent writer. I need to mention The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. I read 3 of his works, and I liked the other 2, but The Book Thief stands out. It's an amazing story, narrated by Death himself. So just that makes it an intriguing read. Some passages of this book brought tears to my eyes. It's a wonderful book. So I'm finally done talking. This video is probably way too long again, but I really wanted to make a new one so that you can look at my shelves and pause them and see through the titles yourself and see what you think of them. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.